I'm going to draw us back a little bit to the geography. And for those of us who don't spend as much time on Indian Ocean issues, I tend to think of certain places a lot, right? So let's go to the west. You have the Strait of Hormuz with the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea over there. And then way over on the east, you have the Strait of Malacca with the South China Sea over there. And then in the middle, there's just all this water, right? And it sort of goes by this big, but we don't really talk about all of that water very much. And yet in your paper, you talk about India having sort of this idea that it can exercise sea control over its Indian Ocean approaches, and yet this threat that China be able to exercise sea denial over those. If China is successful in being able to deny India the ability to access those sea lines of communication, as we call them, what would be the effect on India if they were denied use of those sea routes?
So my friends who wear white suits will always remind me first and foremost that any sea control or sea denial is bounded in time and space, right? There is no sort of oceanic sea control. There is no oceanic sea denial, right? The idea is that at a certain time, at a certain place, you are able to either control or deny traffic through the water. And so the issue is, again, not that in the foreseeable future, China will be able to blockade India so that no trade goes in or out. The issue is more that it will be able to sustain essentially a force in being, a fleet in being that need not be very large. That can be a small number of submarines, for example, that could pose enough of a threat to disrupt Indian shipping, be it military or commercial or energy, and disrupt, for example, the sustainment and resupply of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, right? Offshore islands that are part of Indian territory, for example. And so again, the idea of sea denial is not that India will be cut off from international trade, but that international commerce, energy supplies, or military operations will be disrupted. And even the smallest disruptions, as we've seen with accidents in the Suez, for example, even the smallest disruptions can have surprisingly large cascading effects. And so when a country like India is so dependent on access to the sea for trade and energy and military freedom of action, and the same, and to a slightly lesser extent, the same is true of Australia's access to the Indian Ocean, then even relatively minor disruptions can have an outsized effect. And so that, to me, is the issue. As you said, Ray, historical thinkers about the Indian Ocean have long identified certain choke points, access points to the Indian Ocean, as being key terrain, so to speak, maritime terrain of the Indian Ocean. And so, bottling up the Indian Ocean at those choke points, at the narrow seas, can have a disproportionate effect, which is why the Indian Ocean maintains deployments around those choke points. But the problem is not that you can sort of seal off India. The problem is that you can just cause enough of a disruption that it has a major strategic effect on any country like India.